Welcome to Silent Crime Case, where we delve into some of the darkest, most shocking stories of human behavior, betrayal, and murder. In today's episode, we take you to a wedding in the heart of California's beautiful desert, a day that should have been filled with joy, love, and celebration. But behind the smiles, dark secrets were waiting to be revealed. This is the story of a Mark Harrison, a young man with a bright future ahead, whose life was tragically cut short by the people closest to him. Join us as we unravel the twisted web of lies, betrayal, and obsession that led to Mark's untimely death. Mark Harrison had a life many would envy, at least from the outside. Born in Seattle to a single mother, Angela Harrison. Mark had been raised in a modest, hard-working household. Angela, who had been abandoned by Mark's father when Mark was just a toddler, devoted her life to her son. She worked long hours to provide for him, juggling multiple jobs to ensure he had a solid education and a bright future. The sacrifices she made created a powerful bond between mother and son, one that would later play a tragic role in Mark's life. Mark excelled academically, earning scholarships to prestigious schools. His diligence paid off when he graduated from the University of Washington with a degree in computer science. After securing a job as a senior software engineer at a respected Seattle-based tech firm, Mark's career flourished. Known for his calm and collected nature, Mark had earned the admiration of his peers. Though Mark seemed to have it all: a successful career, respect from his colleagues, and financial security, his personal life was far more complicated. Mark had always been a cautious man, especially when it came to relationships. It wasn't until he met Rachel Turner at a tech conference that Mark's world began to change. Rachel was Mark's opposite in every way. Where Mark was reserved and introverted, Rachel was outgoing, lively, and full of energy. She worked in marketing and had a magnetic personality that instantly drew people to her. They were an unlikely pair, but their differences seemed to complement each other. For Mark, Rachel was a beacon of excitement and spontaneity, a stark contrast to his otherwise predictable life. After a whirlwind romance, Mark proposed to Rachel, and they quickly began planning their wedding. But as the big day approached, Mark began noticing subtle but troubling changes in Rachel's behavior, things he couldn't ignore, no matter how much he tried to dismiss them. She was distant, evasive, and secretive, and Mark's once unshakable trust began to crumble. The wedding day, June 14, 2021, was supposed to be the happiest day of Mark's life. The couple had chosen a picturesque ranch just outside Palm Springs, California, for the event. The stunning desert landscape with its towering cacti and breathtaking sunsets provided the perfect backdrop for a romantic celebration. Friends and family flew in from across the country, including many from Seattle, to witness the union of Mark and Rachel. But behind the glittering smiles and joyful exterior, Mark's doubts continued to grow. Rachel's behavior in the weeks leading up to the wedding had been erratic, to say the least. She frequently disappeared for hours at a time, offering vague explanations or none at all. The carefree, affectionate woman Mark had fallen in love with seemed to have been replaced by someone cold and distant, and every time Mark tried to broach the subject, Rachel would dismiss his concerns, blaming the stress of wedding planning. Despite his growing suspicions, Mark pressed on, determined to make it through the day. He had confided in his best friend, Ethan Collins, his best man, hoping for reassurance. Ethan, who had known Mark since childhood, tried to calm him, but even Ethan's words couldn't extinguish Mark's nagging fears. As Mark stood at the altar, waiting for Rachel to walk down, but the mood was about to take a drastic turn. When Mark stood up to give his speech, his hands were trembling slightly as he held the microphone. His eyes darted across the room before they landed on Rachel, seated next to him, smiling nervously. What he said next would leave everyone in shock. "My wife is a liar and a cheater," Mark began, his voice unsteady. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Rachel's face paled as she stared at Mark in disbelief. "She's been lying to me for months," Mark continued, his voice now stronger, louder. "But tonight, you're all going to hear the truth." The guests were frozen in stunned silence. No one could believe what they were hearing. Rachel remained rooted to her chair, her hands trembling as tears began to form in her eyes. Mark dropped the microphone and stormed out of the barn, leaving a trail of confusion and whispers behind him. Sensing that something was very wrong, Ethan rushed after him. Minutes later, Ethan found Mark lying on the ground just outside the barn, his pristine white tuxedo soaked in blood. Mark had been stabbed multiple times in the chest, The very knife that had been used to cut the wedding cake was now discarded beside his body, its blade covered in blood. Ethan's heart pounded as he knelt beside his best friend, frantically calling his name. But it was too late. Mark was already gone. What had been a night of celebration quickly turned into a nightmare. The wedding venue was cordoned off as police arrived to investigate the brutal murder. Guests, who had been laughing and dancing just moments before, now stood huddled together, shocked and horrified by the tragedy that had unfolded before them. Detective Maria Ortega, a seasoned investigator with the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, was assigned to the case. Ortega was known for her sharp instincts and meticulous approach, but even she was taken aback by the brutality of the crime. Mark's body lay motionless on the ground, his blood-soaked tuxedo a stark contrast to the desert backdrop. The murder weapon, a cake knife, was found nearby, hastily discarded. Ortega knew from the beginning that this was no random act of violence. The attack was too personal, too calculated. Someone close to Mark had killed him, and it was up to her to find out who. The first person Ortega interviewed was Rachel. Still dressed in her blood-stained wedding gown, Rachel was visibly shaken as she spoke to the detective. Her voice trembled as she recounted the events leading up to Mark's shocking accusation, but something about her demeanor felt off. Her tears seemed genuine, but there was a detachment in her tone that didn't sit right with Ortega. Rachel vehemently denied any involvement in Mark's death. She claimed she had no idea why Mark would accuse her of cheating, and she insisted she had been as shocked as everyone else when Mark stormed out of the reception. But Ortega wasn't convinced. The detective had seen this kind of behavior before, the coldness of someone who was hiding something. As the investigation deepened, Ortega began to uncover cracks in the seemingly perfect life Mark and Rachel had built. She interviewed friends and family, many of whom had witnessed the tension between the couple in the weeks leading up to the wedding. Mark had confided in Ethan about his suspicions that Rachel was having an affair, but he hadn't shared the full extent of what he had discovered. Ortega and her team began to sift through phone records and texts, searching for clues to corroborate Mark's suspicions. What they found was far worse than anyone had imagined. Rachel wasn't just hiding an affair with another man. She had been having a secret relationship with someone much closer to Mark than anyone could have anticipated. The other woman was none other than Mark's own mother, Angela Harrison. The revelation of the affair shocked everyone involved in the investigation. Angela, publicly during his speech. With the affair now out in the open, Angela Harrison became the prime suspect in her son's murder. Ortega brought Angela in for questioning, and while she maintained her innocence, it was clear to Ortega that Angela was hiding something. Witnesses had reported seeing Angela near the cake table just before Mark was found dead. Surveillance footage from the wedding venue showed Angela pacing nervously outside the barn minutes before the murder took place. Ortega knew that Angela had motive, a desperate need to keep her affair with Rachel hidden, and the evidence was slowly starting to pile up against her. As Ortega pressed her further, Angela's calm facade began to crack. The once loving mother who had devoted her life to her son was now a woman consumed by jealousy and desperation. Ortega suspected that Angela had killed Mark in a fit of rage, driven by fear of being exposed. But the investigation didn't stop there. As Ortega continued to interview guests, another layer of the story began to unfold, this time involving Ethan Collins, Mark's best man and lifelong friend. It was revealed that Ethan had known about Rachel and Angela's affair for weeks before the wedding, but instead of telling Mark, Ethan had chosen to keep the secret to himself. Why? Because Ethan had his own complicated history with Rachel. Ethan had been romantically involved with Rachel long before she had started her relationship with Angela. His feelings for Rachel had never faded, and he had hoped that she would eventually leave both Mark and Angela to be with him. But when that didn't happen, Ethan's silence became a way to protect his own emotions. Could Ethan's jealousy and unrequited love have led him to commit murder? Ortega knew she couldn't rule out the possibility. The case took a dramatic turn when Ortega's team discovered a hidden digital recorder in the honeymoon suite. The device had captured a heated argument between Mark, Rachel, and Angela on the morning of the wedding. In the recording, Mark can be heard confronting the two women about their affair. His voice trembles with anger and betrayal as he demands the truth from Rachel and his mother. The argument grows increasingly volatile, with Mark threatening to expose them both in front of all the wedding guests. The recording cuts off abruptly, but the damage had already been done. This new evidence provided the breakthrough Ortega needed to link Angela directly to Mark's murder. With the affair exposed, and the recording as proof of motive, Ortega had enough to make the arrest. Angela Harrison was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The trial that followed captivated the nation, as every sordid detail of the affair and the murder was laid bare for the public to see. Angela's defense argued that she had acted in a moment of temporary insanity, driven to desperation by the shame and fear of her affair with Rachel being exposed. They claimed that Angela had been pushed over the edge by Mark's threats to reveal their secret, but the prosecution painted a much darker picture of Angela. They described her as a manipulative and controlling woman who had always sought to dominate Mark's life. Her affair with Rachel was just another extension of that control, and when Mark threatened to expose her, she snapped. After weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for just under 2 days before returning their verdict. Angela Harrison was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The fallout from the case was devastating for everyone involved. Rachel Turner, who had once been a vibrant, outgoing woman, disappeared from public life, her reputation irreparably damaged by the scandal. Ethan Collins, consumed by guilt, left Seattle and moved far away from the memories of his best friend's death, unable to face the weight of what had happened.